I pull into the driveway after 12 relentless hours in the ER. 3 cardiac arrests, a broken arm, a swallowed set of dentures. My scrubs smell of antiseptic and exhaustion. I'm Hallie Cruz, 32, an ER nurse in Portland. I keep other people alive for a living. Tonight I just want quiet, a shower, and sleep. Sunlight paints my street gold, gentle as a hand. Then I see it. My curtains are gone. Inside, the house is hollow enough to hurt. No sofa, no photos, no heartbeat of home. An envelope waits in the doorway's orange light. Mom's tilted script. Thanks for fixing our credit, loser. We're moving to Texas. My knees meet hardwood. The room tilts, then steadies. They didn't just abandon me. They sold my life out from under me. Have you ever faced something like this? Tell me in comments. 7 months earlier, my phone lit at 2 a.m., vibrating like dread. Mom sobbed about Dad's investments, foreclosure letters, and collectors calling. We owe $325,000, she whispered, like confessing murder. I still drove groceries to their door between shifts. I picked up doubles, traded holidays, and swallowed ramen 5 nights weekly. Canceled dental insurance, ignored my back pain, and paid emergency bills. Every week, I wired whatever I could to their mortgage. Late fees shrank while my savings bled out quietly. Sleep came in fragments, alarms stitching the nights together. I told myself this is loyalty. This is what daughters do. On Facebook, Mom posted champagne flutes and captions about family triumph. Brandon pitched another venture while they toasted his entrepreneurial spirit. At the thank you dinner, I washed dishes while they praised him. Least Christine is useful, Mom joked, and everyone politely looked away. Dad smiled into his glass, quiet, complicit, and comfortable. Between patients, I studied housing law on my phone. Deed transfers, title searches, foreclosure timelines, notarization rules. Jennifer slid coffee onto my chart and said, "Keep receipts." I made a folder, labels straight, dates precise, signatures highlighted. Then Dad mentioned refinancing, said paperwork could drop our rate. I booked the appointment, printed tax forms, and breathed like a grown-up. Mom hesitated at the pen, eyes flickering, then signed the deed. This just puts everything in my name temporarily, I explained. For taxes, for timing, for the lender, for us. She nodded, relieved to outsource responsibility again. Days later, more posts, steakhouse dinners, shopping bags, vineyard sunsets. Meanwhile, I changed dressings, called transport, and charted through midnight. When the envelope hit the floor, the timeline finally made sense. Sacrifice wasn't sacred to them. It was convenient. Have you ever faced something like this? Tell me in the comments. They knew exactly who I was. They just refused to see. Morning light hits paperwork like evidence under a forensic lamp. Bayview packets, closing instructions, a penciled note, expedite. I spread everything across hardwood where our couch once lived. Dates align with my night shifts, perfectly timed while I worked. While I charted vitals, they charted exits and down payments. I build a timeline the way I build treatment plans. Symptoms, causes, interventions, outcomes. The outcome has to be me still standing. Mrs. Patterson knocks, holding a box of rescued photos and worry. They told people you approved the sale, she whispers. I didn't, I say, and anger learns language. The realtor's assistant called, uneasy about the title. Call her, Mrs. Patterson urges. Remember who you are. The assistant answers on the second ring, crisp, professional. We found a discrepancy, she says. Ownership transferred to you months ago. My breath snags, like a suture popping free. Can you freeze the sale? We already have, Miss Cruz. Bring identification and records. Records I labeled and highlighted at 3 a.m. Dad's voicemail lands while I print statements at the library. You owe us, don't ruin this. My thumb hovers, then deletes. Brandon texts again. You're dramatic. I mute the thread without ceremony. Mom posts Texas sunsets. Brave new chapters, sparkling lies. I don't reply. I copy receipts instead. Paper is louder than pleading. At the hospital, Jennifer slides a sandwich onto my lap. Eat first, fight second, she says, stealing my chart briefly. I tell her everything in clipped clinical sentences. She becomes triage and team in one person. We sketch a plan on Ivy box cardboard. Title office. Mortgage. Insurance. Utilities. Notarized deed. Neighbors as witnesses, Mara as corroboration if necessary. Names, times, addresses, file tabs. She circles one word at the top, boundaries. After shift, I change the locks and arm a system. Seafoam paint rolls over Brandon's posters like a reclaimed shore. I box their wedding portrait, wrap it in an old tee. On the mantel, I set my nursing license behind glass. Not a trophy. A declaration. This house has a spine. Messages buzz like gnats against a porch light. Guilt, threats, nostalgia, bargains. I answer none of them. Instead, I call the title office. Earliest appointment tomorrow, the clerk says warmly. Bring your records and yourself. Both are required. That night, the house whispers instead of howls. Air mattress on the floor, candle glow on a crate. I scroll the timeline once more, reading it aloud. The narrative finally matches the truth on paper. Not hysteria. Not drama. Documentation. If you've been through this, you're not alone. There's a quiet after every storm. It sounds like doors clicking locked. It smells like fresh paint and midnight coffee. It looks like a woman counting receipts without shaking. They wanted profit. I found proof. The title office smells like toner and coffee. Reception recognizes my name before I speak. Miss Cruz, Mr. Abernathy is ready for you. I follow framed fish and family photos. He shakes my hand, eyes steady, kind. Paperwork waits, tabbed in careful blues. You brought records, he says. Good. I set down binders, receipts, and timelines. We'll review the chain of title together. He reads dates, grants, notary stamps aloud. Ownership transferred to you 7 months ago. You have paid taxes, mortgage, insurance. Sale cannot proceed without your authorization. He pauses. Do you want them present? Put them on speaker, I say. He dials. The line clicks, then swells. Dad arrives mid-sentence, already righteous. We raised her, he says, voice sharp. Mom sniffles, theatrical, pleading at once. Brandon breathes like a storm in drywall. Mr. Cruz, Abernathy says, we're on speaker. Your daughter is present. We're reviewing records. Silence stretches, then Mom's small sob. Sweetheart, how could you do this to us? I keep my voice even, almost gentle. By paying your debt and saving our home. Abernathy clears his throat, returns to facts. Quitclaim deed, notarized. Dates align with deposits. Signatures appear voluntary. No coercion indicated. Dad's voice spikes, brittle and loud. She tricked us with refinancing forms. The deed is titled clearly, Mr. Cruz. Your signatures are here and notarized. Mom tries another key, helplessness. We're old. We didn't understand anything. You understood steakhouse bills and vineyard tours. I slide the framed note across desk. Thanks for fixing our credit, loser. Abernathy exhales, the sound final. Mr. and Mrs. Cruz, the sale is void. Any further attempts may constitute fraud. We recommend counsel before further action. Dad sputters. Mom whispers my name like injury. Brandon starts in with threats and bargains. I raise one hand, palm open, steady. This isn't a negotiation. This is notice. I am the owner of record. Your listing is canceled. Your access is revoked. Keys changed. Security installed. Mail forwarding available. Mom cries harder. Dad calls me ungrateful. Abernathy slides tissues toward me, not them. Miss Cruz, he asks softly, do you consent? I nod. Please record today's findings immediately. He stamps documents. The room changes temperature. Dad's righteousness retreats into static. Mom's sobs stop performing for witnesses. Brandon's bravado collapses into breathing. I gather binders, slide them into my bag. One more thing, I say, almost kind. Do not contact my employer again, ever. Any harassment becomes part of the file. We're done here, Mr. Abernathy. He stands, offers a steady handshake. Outside, Portland air smells like rain and iron. I sit in my car, hands on wheel. Not shaking, not apologizing, not asking permission. I turn off my phone and breathe. For the first time, stillness isn't fear. It's ownership settling into my bones. It's the click of a lock inside. For the first time, silence belonged to me. By sunset, my living room looks lived in. A green couch, a scratched table, mismatched chairs. Not perfect, but warm, and mine. Jennifer laughs, taming a stubborn rug. I change the deadbolt before bed. The click is a lullaby. 2 nights later, rain needles the windows, headlights smear across the wall and stop. 3 silhouettes crowd beneath an umbrella. The bell rings. The camera blinks awake. I open the door. I don't step aside. Mom's mascara runs in dark rivers. Dad's shoulders are smaller than memory. Brandon smells like wet leather and entitlement. Harley, Mom begins, reaching for softness. We have nowhere else to go. You can't leave family on the street. I think about the envelope on my floor. The empty closets. The stripped bathroom cabinet. The motel they liked until money vanished. My voice stays level, my hands visible. You left me with walls and don't call. Dad clears his throat, choosing indignation. We raised you. We gave you everything. I glance at my nursing license above the mantel. You taught consequences, I say. Pay what you owe. Brandon steps forward, accusation sharpened. You stole our house. That's the truth. I let our evaporate between us. I place a folder on the entry table. Receipts bloom under lamplight. Mortgage payments, taxes, utilities, insurance. $78,000 in 7 months. Another 23 on credit cards. The deed you signed, notarized, witnessed. And your note on my floor. Thanks for fixing our credit, loser. Mom stares like paper might forgive her. Dad scans for exits that don't exist. Brandon smirks, then wilts when I don't flinch. Here are your options, I say firm. 3 nights at Motel 6 paid. After that, make adult decisions. No basement, no spare key. This isn't your plan B. Mom tries sobbing on command. Dad tries bargaining, then blame, then threats. Brandon tries volume, stepping forward again. I don't move, my voice stays low. Security records everything. Police are 1 button away. Leave now, or I press it. They retreat into rain that rinses illusions. Brandon mutters about lawyers and gratitude. Dad steadies Mom toward the sidewalk. Their umbrella flips like a cheap lie. I close the door and set the chain. The house breathes with me, steady and sure. Not vindictive, not cruel, just mine. Voicemails multiply. Texts stack like junk mail. I answer none of them. I wash 2 mugs and a plate. Water the spider plant by the window. Sweep rain from the entryway. Small chores, large clarity. I sit and reopen the folder. Inside are copies and boundaries, both in writing. I write 1 line on a sticky note. No rescues, no explanations, no loans. I press it inside the front door. A reminder for anyone who forgets, including me. Biology doesn't make a family. Actions do. 1 year later, the garden lifts its stubborn, bright face. Marigolds and zinnias stitch color along the fence. The stone gnome keeps his chipped grin, guarding roots. Inside, light pours across clay-splattered tables. Bowls dry like quiet victories on warm shelves. I center a lump of earth, palms steady. Shaping, not fixing. Building, not begging. A life that doesn't ask permission anymore. On Wednesdays, I mentor a student named Lucia. We rehearse boundaries like we rehearse code blues. Clear voices, clear steps. Document what matters. My house is lighter, and so am I. Mrs. Patterson clips dahlias for my table. Jennifer cooks in my kitchen and makes me laugh. Therapy gave me grammar for old pain. Financial control. Manipulation. Narrative theft. Naming it didn't make me smaller. It made the story honest and portable. I carry it without bleeding now. At Providence, I started a small support circle. 8 chairs, paper cups, silence respected. We share ledgers, screenshots, timelines, wins. Someone whispers, but they're family. We answer, so are we. If you've rebuilt after betrayal, share your story below. If you're still in it, you're not alone tonight. A housewarming felt overdue, so we threw one. Secondhand couches, a lopsided cake, a good playlist. We toasted what remains and what begins. To work that is ours. To love that is chosen. To doors that open and lock when necessary. When updates arrive about my parents, I don't flinch. Texas dissolved. Separations filed. Consequences working slowly. I wish them responsibility. I wish myself peace. The mirror by the door returns a steadier stranger. Keys rest quiet in my hand. Some things earned can never be taken away. Have you ever faced something like this? Tell me in the comments. If you've been through this, you're not alone tonight. If you're rebuilding, share one step you're taking today. The hardest boundaries protect the softest hearts.
Thanksgiving at my mother's house had always followed the same unspoken script. The table was set perfectly polished silverware cloth napkins folded into triangles, candles flickering like we were about to film a commercial. The turkey always smelled amazing. So did the cinnamon rolls, the sweet potatoes, the pie. On the surface, it was all warmth and tradition. But underneath it, it was a theater, and my brother Brad was always the star. He sat at the head of the table just like every year, leaning back with that casual, easy confidence that made it look like he belonged there. Brad didn't need to try. He never had. People made room for him without being asked. And my mother Diane, well, she made sure the spotlight stayed firmly on him. Her voice would light up whenever she said his name. Her stories always seemed to circle back to something Brad had accomplished. Bought a car, got promoted, closed on a house. You'd think he cured cancer with the way she spoke about him. And me, I was Natalie. The quiet one. The one who helped clear the plates. The one no one ever asked real questions about. It always started the same way. Once the plates were filled and the small talk ran its course, Diane would lean in with that familiar sparkle in her eye, the kind that signaled she had an announcement, a performance to begin. She lifted her wine glass like a baton, ready to conduct the room's admiration. So she said, drawing the word out like a stage cue, Brad just closed on the most beautiful home. 4 bedrooms, updated kitchen. The yard is to die for. It's a real investment, you know. Something with a future. The room hummed with predictable approval. Aunt Barbara gave a little gasp of delight. My cousin Lisa clapped softly. Brad, of course, didn't look up from his plate. He just gave that modest half smile he'd perfected over the years, the kind that said, "Oh, stop, but do keep going." I took a sip of water, not wine, not yet. Then, right on schedule, Diane turned her eyes toward me. I knew the look before she even tilted her head. "Sweetheart," she said, that soft, overly sympathetic tone coating every syllable. "When are you finally going to settle down?" There it was. The line. The one I'd heard a dozen different ways over the years, wrapped in concern laced with condescension. It didn't matter how I answered. It never had. Anything short of a ring, a mortgage and a photo-ready family was a disappointment, something to politely acknowledge then quickly shift back to Brad. For years, I played along. I smiled, laughed, gave vague answers. "Oh, someday," or "I'm just figuring things out." I let it slide, because causing a scene would only prove her point right. But this year was different. Not because I had something to prove, but because I no longer cared if she approved. That shift in me wasn't loud. It was quiet, subtle, like the way you realize one morning that you've stopped missing someone who never really showed up for you in the first place. So I looked up from my plate and met her eyes, calm and steady, and I smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile she was expecting. I let the silence stretch, let it settle into the room like a slow fog. Diane's question still hovered in the air, delicate but heavy, waiting for me to respond the way I always had, with a polite smile, a soft deflection, a nod to their version of what a real life looked like. But this time I was done with that. I reached for my wine calm and deliberate, letting the glass rest for a second in my hand before taking a measured sip. It was just long enough to make Brad shift in his seat. Just long enough for Diane to glance toward him expecting a joke at my expense. Just long enough for everyone to realize I wasn't going to smooth it over. I set my glass down gently. Then I looked straight at my mother, and I smiled. Not the kind of smile that asks permission, the kind that makes people sit up. "Oh," I said, my voice even. "I already did." Diane blinked. "Did what? Settle down?" I said, still smiling. "I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me." Her fork hit the plate with a sharp clink that echoed louder than it should have. No one spoke. Not Aunt Barb, not Lisa, not even Brad. They all looked at me like I'd just said something indecent or impossible. Diane's mouth opened slightly, her eyes wide with confusion, as if the very idea that I had a life outside her knowledge was not just strange, but offensive. I didn't look away. I let her sit with it, with all the assumptions that had just cracked like thin glass, with the quiet message behind my words, "You never saw me. You never asked. And I don't need you to." And that was just the beginning. I didn't rush. I let the silence linger, let it do the heavy lifting. Sometimes stillness carries more weight than any raised voice ever could. And that night, it was doing exactly that. Aunt Barb was the first to move. She reached for the mashed potatoes like her hands needed something to do. But even then, she kept sneaking glances in my direction like she was trying to connect the Natalie she thought she knew with the one sitting in front of her. Diane cleared her throat. "So, where is this house of yours?" Her voice was measured now, no longer dripping with sweetness, just thin, cautious. She was trying to reestablish footing, to remind the table that she still had the authority to ask the questions. I gave a small shrug. "Not far," I said, reaching for the breadbasket. "Maybe 20 minutes, depending on traffic." The way the room leaned in at that answer, it was almost funny. Not just curiosity, hunger. for details, for control, for context they never bothered to seek before. It was the kind of attention I hadn't received at that table in years, maybe ever. Brad's smirk flickered at the edges. 20 minutes, he repeated with forced casualness. What kind of place is it? I didn't answer right away. I took my time buttering my roll. Then, still calm, still perfectly unbothered, I said, just over 4,000 square feet. That was when the energy shifted for good. Lisa let out a soft whistle. Barb blinked hard. Diane's hand tensed around her fork. Even Brad leaned back slightly, his jaw tightening as he processed the number. It wasn't a brag. I didn't say it like it was impressive. I said it like it was ordinary, like it was just a fact. And that more than the number itself was what unsettled them. Diane forced a smile. Well, that sounds sizable, she said. But don't you think that's a bit much for someone on their own? There it was, the subtle tug back, the instinct to reframe it, to remind me that success, if not shared on their terms, didn't really count. I looked at her and gave a slow, easy nod. Maybe I said, but I paid in full. So it's not exactly a burden. Her face twitched. Brad's hand tightened around his glass. And just like that, the story they'd all told themselves about me began to slip through their fingers. Diane tried to hold her composure, but I could see the small signs of strain, the tightness in her shoulders, the way her fingers curled around her fork like it might float away if she didn't anchor it. The pause, barely a second before she found her voice again. How long have you had it? She asked. There was something underneath her tone now, not just curiosity, something more brittle, a little too polite, like someone trying not to show just how far behind they felt in a conversation they thought they were leading. Almost a year, I said. That did it. Her eyes flicked toward Brad. His smirk faltered just enough to show the crack. He covered it with a sip of wine, but his grip on the glass was rigid. A full year, and they hadn't known a thing. No housewarming party, no photos, no breadcrumb trail on social media. Nothing. I'd built something entirely my own, and they had missed it because they never thought to ask. Diane tried again. Why didn't you tell us? Her voice wasn't sharp this time. It was softer, but not warm wounded. And that was new. I tilted my head slightly as if I needed a moment to think. I didn't. I guess it just never came up, I said. I let the words settle. She had no comeback, no easy retort. Brad let out a short laugh. Come on, Natalie, he said, shaking his head. A house is a pretty big deal. Kind of weird to keep it a secret, don't you think? I met his gaze calmly. Not really, I said. It's not like anyone ever asked. Brad sat forward, just slightly, elbows resting on the edge of the table like he was getting ready to reestablish dominance. What kind of place did you even buy? He asked. His tone was casual on the surface, but there was something underneath, something forced, like he was already trying to shape the narrative before the details arrived. I knew exactly what he was doing. I'd seen it for years. Minimize, redirect, dismiss. I didn't give him the satisfaction of hurrying my answer. I picked up my wine glass, swirled it slowly, took a quiet sip. Then I looked directly at him. Oh, I said like it had just occurred to me. It's bigger than yours. The silence that followed was instant. Not stunned, not offended, just still. Like the room needed a moment to absorb what had just been said. Brad's smirk flickered again, just a twitch at the corner, but his fingers tightened around his glass. His jaw tensed. He didn't like being on the back foot. Not here. Not in front of Diane. Not at this table where for so long he'd been the untouchable one. Diane blinked rapidly. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. No clever deflection. No protective praise. Aunt Barb, ever curious, leaned in. Bigger? She asked. How big are we talking? I didn't answer right away. I let them want it. Let them sit in the unfamiliar space of not knowing everything about me. Finally, I said lightly, just over 4,000 square feet. The quiet gasp from Barb was almost comical. Diane's breath caught, and Brad didn't say a word. But he didn't have to. His silence said plenty. Diane tried to recover. She clasped her hands together in her lap, sat up straighter, and forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, Brad's home is lovely too," she said brightly, her voice just a little too loud. "And it's in such a nice neighborhood. A smart investment." Brad exhaled through his nose and sat taller, clearly grateful for the assist. "Yeah," he said. "You know real estate's all about timing. I got a great deal." Aunt Barb tilted her head. "Wait," she said, setting down her fork. "You didn't pay for it in full." The question hit harder than she intended. It sliced through the fabric of Diane's narrative with a single sentence. Brad paused just a fraction of a second, but it was long enough. "Well, no," he admitted. "Most people don't write. That's not really how it works." I gave a soft hum, nodding slowly. "That's fair," I said. "Some of us just prefer not to owe anyone anything." Brad didn't respond. His jaw clenched. His knuckles were white against the base of his wine glass, and I knew I'd just touched a nerve. For the first time, the golden boy didn't look so golden. I leaned back in my chair, let my fingers graze the rim of my plate, and turned my gaze toward him. "So," I said gently, "how's your mortgage, Brad?" His mouth twitched. It was barely visible, but it was there. Diane looked between us, clearly sensing the tension, but not yet understanding where it was headed. "Brad's doing just fine," she said quickly. "He's responsible. He always has been." I tilted my head. "Is that so?" Brad's eyes flicked toward me, narrowed. "You like to talk about success," I said evenly. "You like to act like you've got it all figured out, but the truth is, you didn't really buy that house, did you?" He froze. And for a split second I saw something I'd never seen in him before. Fear. "You what?" Diane said, looking sharply at him. "What is she talking about?" I didn't blink. "Did you tell her, Brad?" I asked, voice soft but steady. "That you're barely staying afloat, that you maxed out your credit cards just to make the down payment, that the bank owns most of what you claim is yours." The silence that followed was thick. Diane looked at Brad like he was a stranger. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "You're lying," he said finally, flat and desperate. "You don't know what you're talking about." I leaned forward, rested my elbows lightly on the table. "If I'm lying," I said, "then show Mom your bank statements, your mortgage balance, your credit score." He didn't move, didn't speak. And that was all the proof anyone needed. Diane's napkin twisted between her fingers as if it might hold the room together. "Brad," she whispered, "tell me she's wrong." He laughed. It was sharp dry, the kind of sound that collapses in on itself. "She's just trying to stir things up," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "She doesn't know what she's talking about." I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. "If I'm wrong," I said, "then prove it." That was all. No yelling, no accusations, just calm, measured words. And it gutted him more than shouting ever could. Brad's jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle twitch beneath his skin. Diane looked at him, really looked maybe for the first time in years. The certainty in her face was gone, replaced by something heavier. Doubt. "Show me," she said. "Brad, show me." He opened his mouth, closed it. His hand ran through his hair, and suddenly he didn't look composed. He looked like a boy caught in a lie too big to explain away. Finally, his voice came small and cornered. "Fine," he muttered. "It's 300. The breath left Diane's lungs in a slow, audible exhale. 300,000, she said, barely getting the words out. "It's not that bad," he rushed. "It's temporary. I have a plan. I'm restructuring." But it didn't matter what he said. The spell had broken. For years, she had paraded him around like a trophy, like everything he touched turned to gold. And now, in the same room where she'd spent decades praising him, the truth sat between them like a third guest at the table. "You let me tell everyone you bought that house outright." Diane said, her voice trembling. "You let me believe I didn't ask you to." He cut in, voice harsh. But it was too late. The image she'd wrapped her identity around Brad, the success, Brad the example, was cracked. And everyone at that table could see it. I sat still. No need to twist the knife. It had already sunk deep enough. For the first time in my life, Diane didn't know what to say. And Brad. He looked like a man who'd built his kingdom on sand and just heard the tide rolling in. The silence after his confession wasn't awkward. It was arresting. Lisa sat back, eyes wide. Aunt Barb blinked at her plate like she couldn't remember how to hold her fork. Even the turkey seemed to cool faster in the air. Brad's knee bounced under the table, nervous energy with nowhere to go. He looked like a man who had counted on one thing all his life, that no matter what, Diane would be in his corner. But she wasn't speaking. She just stared at him, quiet, unmoving, her hands folded in her lap now as if even they had surrendered. He turned to me. "You think you've won something here?" he snapped. "You really needed to humiliate me at Thanksgiving." "Natalie?" I didn't raise my voice. "I didn't need to." "I didn't humiliate you," I said evenly. "You did that all by yourself." His nostrils flared, his jaw tightened again, but this time he had no comeback, no snide remark, just breathing shallow and defensive. I looked at Diane. "You never asked about my career, my life, my choices." I said, my voice calm but undeniable. "You assumed if I wasn't like Brad, I was failing. But I didn't fail. I just stopped reporting to a system that never included me." Her lips parted slightly, a protest maybe, but no words came out. For a long time, I'd told myself her favoritism didn't matter, that I was above it. But now, watching her face shift under the weight of reality, I realized something else. I had never needed her pride. I had only needed her honesty. And that, at last, was starting to show. Brad stood abruptly. His chair scraped back hard on the floor. "I'm done," he muttered. "I don't need to sit here and be judged." "Funny," I said, folding my napkin. "That's what I've been doing for years." He didn't answer. He just walked away. The sound of his footsteps retreating down the hall was the loudest thing in the house. When the front door shut behind him, Diane still hadn't moved. But something in the room had, and this time the shift wasn't temporary. It stuck. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence breathe. Diane sat still, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. Her eyes hadn't moved from the doorway where Brad had disappeared, but her expression had. No longer proud, no longer assured, just lost. For once, the person left in the room with her wasn't the one who needed explaining. It was her. "You always assumed I was behind," I said quietly. "You never asked where I was actually going." Her gaze shifted to me then. Slowly, like she wasn't sure she wanted to meet my eyes. But she did. "Do you really think I never cared?" she asked, and there was something softer in her voice, thin, almost threadbare. "I think you cared about the version of me you could understand," I answered. "The one who didn't challenge your view of success. The one who let you measure everything in square footage job titles and polite stories you could tell your friends." She blinked. Once. Twice. Then looked down at her hands. Aunt Barb cleared her throat. "Natalie," she said gently, "why didn't you tell anyone what you were building?" I smiled, not bitter, not smug. Just honest. "Because none of you ever asked." "Not really." They'd asked about holidays, about the weather, but not about the long nights I'd spent building my business. Not about the risks I took or the wins that no one saw. They hadn't even asked if I was okay when I skipped 2 Thanksgivings in a row. They'd just assumed I was drifting. Diane looked at me again, and this time I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not regret, recognition. Maybe for the first time she wasn't seeing me through the lens of comparison. Maybe now she was seeing the woman who'd quietly done what none of them thought she could, and didn't need them to. I stood up slowly. No rush, no dramatics. Just the quiet scrape of my chair and the weight of every Thanksgiving past falling away behind me. I reached for my purse, slid the strap over my shoulder, adjusted my coat with a calmness I hadn't felt in years. No one spoke. Diane didn't stop me. She didn't ask me to stay. She didn't try to salvage whatever remained between us. And maybe that was the most telling thing of all. I looked around the room one last time. Brad's empty chair sat like an exclamation point to the whole night. Aunt Barb stared down at her plate hands folded tight. Lisa looked at me, just looked like she was seeing me for the first time and trying to catch up. I turned to Diane. Her eyes were glossy, her lips parted, but she said nothing, just watched me as if expecting a final blow, a cruel remark, some triumphant jab. But I didn't need that. I didn't leave to hurt anyone. I left because finally I didn't owe anyone here an explanation. Next time you want to know about my life, I said, voice steady low without edge, maybe try actually listening. And with that, I opened the front door. The cold evening air met my face crisp and quiet. A world outside this dining room where I wasn't someone's shadow or comparison or disappointment, just me. I stepped out into it. No applause, no gasps, no final words trailing after me. Only peace. The kind that doesn't come from proving anything, only from finally letting go of trying. I don't think there was a single moment in my childhood when I wasn't gently reminded that I came second. Not in a dramatic way, no family meeting where they spelled it out for me. Just a slow, quiet drip. 1,000 tiny instructions, glances, decisions that all whispered the same truth. My younger sister Brooke was the one who needed more attention, more understanding, more forgiveness. And I was the one expected to give it. If she broke something of mine, my mother Diane would look at me and sigh. She's younger, Catherine. Just let it go. If Brooke threw a fit over a toy I was using, Diane wouldn't scold her. She'd turn to me almost gently and say, "You know how she gets. Just let her have it." Even when I didn't want to, I did, because I was older, because I knew better, because they made sure I understood that Brooke's emotions mattered more than fairness. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing I need people to understand. It wasn't one massive betrayal. It was the slow, careful construction of a world where my needs were always optional. The pattern started early and never changed. It just grew more complicated as we grew older. What began as toys and tantrums turned into expectations and rules that were never equally applied. I wasn't just the older sister. I was the buffer, the fixer, the one who could take it. And in that quiet, daily sacrifice, I started to disappear. I never screamed about it. I didn't rebel or throw things or demand to be seen. I adjusted. I learned to move around Brooke's moods like she was a force of nature. I learned how to offer silence when I wanted to speak, how to give in before it became a fight, how to smile when I didn't win. And the worst part is, I believed that made me strong. I carried that belief with me into adulthood, into every choice I made, into how I measured my worth. That if I could just keep things calm, carry the weight without complaint, they'd see me differently. They never did. By the time I turned 16, that quiet understanding had become law. If I wanted anything beyond the basics, a phone, decent clothes, a chance at independence, I had to earn it myself. So I found a weekend job, then after school shifts. I stocked shelves, wiped tables, ran registers. I worked because no one else was going to give me anything, and I learned early not to ask. But when Brooke turned 16, it was different. She didn't apply for jobs. She didn't even pretend to care about money. On her birthday, Rick, our father, handed her car keys, and Diane handed her a credit card. "Just focus on your studies, sweetheart," my mother said, brushing Brooke's hair behind her ear like something out of a commercial. "We'll handle the rest." That was the phrase that never made an appearance in my life. We'll handle it. For college, I applied for every scholarship I could find. I still came up short, so I borrowed. I rented the cheapest room I could find. I ate boxed pasta 5 nights a week and worked 2 part-time jobs just to stay afloat. I was tired in a way I didn't know how to explain because no one ever asked. Brooke, meanwhile, got into a private university. Not just tuition, but housing, groceries, utilities. Everything was covered by Diane and Rick. She lived in a sunny off-campus apartment with white curtains and a balcony, and never once had to skip a class because she was working a double. And when I asked Diane about it just once, gently her response was calm and simple. "Brooke isn't as strong as you, Catherine. She needs more support." That line was the spine of their logic, the foundation for every unequal choice. It didn't matter how much I struggled. What mattered was that I could survive it. And I did. That was the problem. When Brooke ran out of money, they bailed her out. When she totaled her car, they replaced it. When she maxed out her credit card buying things she didn't need, Rick paid it without even frowning. When I was hit with a surprise medical bill, urgent, terrifying, I called home heart-pounding, thinking maybe just this once. Diane sighed and said, "I wish we could help, honey, but things are tight right now. You'll figure it out." I always figured it out, and they always let me. Eventually, I stopped asking, not just for help, but for attention, for care, for acknowledgement. I stopped expecting to be anyone worth worrying about, and somehow that made things easier for them. When Dan Myers proposed, I didn't cry. I laughed, not because I didn't care, but because I hadn't expected anyone to choose me with that kind of certainty. It was a quiet moment, just the two of us on a rainy afternoon, and somehow it felt like I was finally being seen. For the first few weeks, I lived in that warmth. Planning the wedding felt surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's life, a life where I could be the center of something without guilt. But as the date drew closer, something shifted, subtle at first. Diane, my mother, started sighing in that practiced way of hers. Every time we mentioned the cost of catering or flowers, she'd tilt her head's soft voice just slightly too measured. "Weddings are so expensive these days. It's such a shame really spending that much on just one day." She wasn't trying to talk me out of it. She just wanted me to feel guilty for being celebrated. Rick, my father, was quieter but no less precise. "We've been making some sacrifices lately," he said one evening, looking over his glass of wine. "Things aren't as easy as they used to be. But you know we do what we can. Brooks had a rough year." I didn't say anything. I just nodded the way I always had. But something in my chest tightened, and Brooke made no effort to hide how she felt. She rolled her eyes whenever the wedding came up, made loud comments about how ridiculous bridesmaid dresses were, scoffed when anyone mentioned a registry. She even joked that I was acting like a princess when I cried during a cake tasting. But what cut deepest was the look on her face whenever someone gave me their full attention, like my happiness was a threat, like my joy was stealing oxygen she thought belonged to her. Dan noticed first. One night while I was obsessing over the seating chart, he stood across from me, arms folded, watching. His voice was calm, but the edge in it was new. "They're going to pull something," he said. I looked up. "Who your parents?" he said simply. I shook my head, tried to laugh. "Dan, come on. They can be selfish, sure, but it's our wedding. They wouldn't ruin our wedding." He didn't answer right away, just watched me steady. Then he reached for his jacket, pulled out a sealed white envelope, and set it on the table. Just in case, he said. I didn't ask what was inside. I just looked at it. And for the first time, I wondered if Dan was right. The morning of the wedding felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you think maybe, just maybe, things might go right. The sky was clear. The florist arrived early. My dress fit like it was always meant for me, and for the first time in years, I let myself believe I was allowed to have something beautiful. Diane greeted me with a warm smile and a cup of tea, as if we did this all the time. She smoothed my hair like she used to when I was 5. "You look lovely, Catherine," she said. Truly. Even Brooke held back. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't sigh. She barely said anything at all. I took it as progress. The ceremony was soft, and full vows spoken through held breath eyes glistening in the light. The air was thick with roses, champagne, and something I hadn't known I'd been waiting for quiet approval. My mother clapped during the toasts. My father danced with me. Brooke sat near the window and didn't complain when the music got loud. It was everything I hadn't known I wanted, a moment where I wasn't just tolerated, I was seen. And then there was the card. I found it just before walking down the aisle, tucked into my bouquet. A small ivory envelope with my name in Diane's handwriting. Inside was a short message. "No matter what today, you are our daughter, and you are loved. Mom." It was vague, simple, but somehow it broke something open. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she saw me. Not as Brooke's shadow, not as the strong one who never asked for anything, just me. So when the music played and the room spun with people I loved, I let myself fall into the illusion. I smiled so hard my cheeks ached. I danced until my feet throbbed. I held Dan's hand like a lifeline. I told myself I'd been wrong to worry. They'd changed. They had to have changed. Because surely no one would pretend so perfectly just to tear it all down. It happened just after the first dance. The band had taken a short break. The room had quieted into conversation and soft clinks of glass. I was still warm from the music, a little breathless cheeks flushed from spinning with Dan beneath the lights. That's when Diane touched my arm. She was smiling too brightly. The kind of smile that meant she was about to say something she knew I wouldn't like, but thought I might accept anyway. "Come with me a moment," she said, voice gentle, hands light. I followed her to a corner near the bar, away from the guests, where the candles flickered low. She took my hands in hers and squeezed them like she had something beautiful to share. "You look radiant," she said, almost in a whisper. "It's a lovely evening." I waited. The pause wasn't casual, it was deliberate. Then she leaned in her voice soft enough that no one else would hear. "We're keeping your gift money. Brooke needs it more than you do." For a moment I couldn't speak. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood, that she'd said something else entirely, something harmless. But the way she kept smiling like she'd just handed me a blessing told me I'd heard her exactly right. "I'm sorry," I asked finally. She sighed like this was difficult for her. "Sweetheart, you don't need it," she said. "You have Dan now. You're building a life together. Brooke's struggling and it's only fair that she gets a little help." My fingers had gone cold. The hum of the reception blurred into a low drone behind me. I was still holding her hands and I hated that I hadn't pulled away yet. "That money wasn't yours to touch," I said. My voice came out low, flat. Diane blinked just once. Her smile didn't drop, but something in it tightened. "We're your parents," she said like that explained everything. "In this family we help each other." That was when I understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't temporary blindness or a lapse in judgment. This was exactly what she believed, that I was a resource to be tapped, that Brooke's needs would always outweigh my own. And even here, even on my wedding day, my joy, my celebration, my moment, she still expected me to hand it over, just like I always had. I didn't know he was standing behind me until I heard his voice. It was quiet, measured, but there was something in it that made the air go still. "Good thing we planned for this," Dan said. I turned. He was calm, hands in his pockets, eyes steady on Diane. Not angry, not surprised, just ready. Her smile faltered just slightly. "What do you mean?" she asked, still holding on to her expression like it might shield her. Dan didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out the envelope. The one he'd given me weeks ago, the one I hadn't opened. He held it between two fingers and extended it to her like an offering. "Go ahead," he said. "Open it." Rick had joined us now. He stood just behind Diane, arms crossed, jaw tight. His eyes narrowed at Dan like he was sizing him up, but said nothing. Diane hesitated, then took the envelope with carefully practiced grace. She slid a nail beneath the flap and pulled out a stack of papers. I watched her scan the first page. Her hands didn't shake, not yet, but I saw the stillness in her face, the tightening around her mouth, the way her breath caught halfway through the second paragraph. Rick leaned in to read over her shoulder. I saw his brow crease. "What the hell is this?" he asked. Dan's voice didn't rise. "It didn't need to. It's a notarized legal declaration," he said. "Signed 3 weeks ago. It states that all wedding gifts, monetary or otherwise, are legally the property of Catherine and me." Diane blinked. Dan continued. "Any attempt to withhold, redirect, or access those funds without our consent constitutes theft and will be prosecuted." The silence after that was thick enough to choke on. Diane looked at me now, not with sweetness, not with that gentle condescension, but with a flicker of something I hadn't seen in her before. Uncertainty. "You wouldn't take us to court," she said, barely above a whisper. "We're family." Dan smiled, small, controlled. "Oh, I would," he said. And he would. I could see it in the way he stood. Not defiant, not angry, just unwavering. He had drawn a line and he would not let them step over it. Rick's mouth opened, then closed again. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. For once, I wasn't the one explaining, defending, or softening the blow. I just stood beside my husband and let them sit with the reality they'd never expected, that they had pushed too far, and that someone was finally pushing back. The silence didn't last long. Brooke stepped forward, her heels clicking too sharply against the floor. Her face was flushed lips, tight eyes wide with disbelief. She looked between the envelope in Diane's hand and the unreadable expression on Dan's face. Then she cracked. "This isn't fair!" She shouted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You're married now, Kate. You don't even need that money. You have a husband, a future everything, and I have nothing." Her voice rose higher with every word, each sentence more breathless than the last. "I'm struggling, and you don't even care." I didn't answer. I just watched her, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel shock. I felt something colder, because in that moment it hit me she meant it. She wasn't lashing out. She wasn't being manipulative. She wasn't throwing a tantrum to get her way. She truly deeply believed that she had a right to what was mine, to the money, to the moment, to anything I had that she didn't, because that's how it had always been. Her pain, real or imagined, mattered more than my boundaries. Her struggle, self-inflicted or not, was always more urgent than my stability. I'd spent years hoping she'd grow out of it, that one day she'd wake up and realize she wasn't the center of the universe, that she'd stop asking, that she'd finally learn to carry her own weight. But as I watched her now, shoulders trembling, fists, clenched tears streaking her face like a child denied dessert, I knew the truth. She was never going to change, and I was done waiting for her to. Rick stepped forward so fast it startled even Diane. His face was red, his mouth-tight eyes hard as stone. For a moment he looked like he might explode not just with anger, but with something deeper, something wounded. "I have never been so ashamed of you," he spat. "Not in my life. I didn't move. I didn't flinch, didn't fold, didn't look away." I met his eyes, steady calm, the way I had never dared to before, and let his words hang in the air like smoke that no longer choked me. The shame he was trying to hand me didn't fit anymore. I didn't say it out loud, but the silence between us said enough. "You don't get to be ashamed of the daughter you never protected." Dan took a step closer, his voice low but sharp like a blade that didn't need to be lifted to draw blood. "If you try to take 1 cent from us, he said we will see you in court." There was no heat in his voice, no anger, just certainty. And that's what made it land. Diane's lips parted like she might say something, but no words came. Brooke let out a frustrated sob behind her, but no one turned to her now. Even Rick said nothing more, because for the first time they understood the math had changed. There would be no pleading, no compromise, no playing on guilt or history or the 1,000 quiet ways they'd trained me to fold. There was only a daughter who didn't need their approval, a husband who would stand beside her, and a line they would not cross again. We walked away without a word. The music behind us had picked up again, strings and soft laughter trying to fill the space that had cracked wide open. But to me, the hall felt hushed, as if the air itself knew something had shifted. Dan's hand was warm in mine, steady, certain. My spine lengthened with each step. I didn't glance back. I didn't need to, until I felt her fingers close around my wrist. The grip was too familiar tight, but trembling. "Catherine." My mother's voice was small, barely more than a breath. I turned. She looked unrecognizable. Her eyes were wide, her composure gone. The practiced grace she'd worn like a second skin for decades had fallen away. What was left was a woman unraveling. "You don't mean this," she whispered. "We're your family?" I didn't answer right away. For once, I let the silence settle on her shoulders. I let her sit in it, the weight of her words, the hollowness behind them. I let her feel the truth she had never wanted to see. Then I spoke, not loud, not cruel, just steady. "You were never my family," I said, tilting my head. "You were Brooke's." Her face went still, like the words had struck her across the mouth. Her hand dropped from my wrist as if it had been burned. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The collapse wasn't loud, it was quiet, almost invisible. But I saw it all. I saw the way her shoulders slumped, the way her fingers twitched as if trying to grab something that had already slipped through, the way her eyes flicked to Dan, not with anger now, but with disbelief. She had never imagined this moment, not once. She'd always assumed I'd circle back, that no matter what they took, I'd come home eventually. But this time I wasn't walking away in silence. I was walking away with everything I had built on my own, and I wasn't leaving the door cracked. We kept walking, step by step, breath by breath, away from the people who had once called themselves my family. Behind us, the reception hummed faintly laughter-clinking glasses music, a soundtrack for someone else's version of the day. Not ours, not anymore. And then I heard it. The scuffle of hurried footsteps, the sharp whisper of a breathless voice. "Catherine, please." It was Diane again, her words chasing me desperate now. I didn't turn around. Behind her, Brooke's voice climbed into a shriek. Something about how I was ruining everything, how she deserved better, how I had stolen the spotlight. Then came Rick, low and furious, cursing under his breath, no longer trying to hide his rage, only trying to hold together whatever pride he thought he still had. It all came at once. The pleading, the outrage, the fury, a perfect storm of the old pattern. Except this time I wasn't standing in the middle of it. I didn't turn around, not to Diane's cracking voice, not to Brooke's tantrum, not to Rick's bitterness, because they weren't speaking to me. They were speaking to the version of me they had created, the one who apologized, who sacrificed, who stayed. But she didn't exist anymore. That girl, the one who waited her whole life to be seen to be chosen, she had finally chosen herself. Dan squeezed my hand once, quiet, solid, present, and that was all I needed. I walked on, past the voices, past the wreckage, past the years I had spent begging for scraps. I didn't need a final word. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need closure. Some things end not with confrontation, but with a silence so final it leaves nothing behind. And in that silence, I found a peace. There is no next section. This is where the story ends. No confrontation, no revenge, just a woman who finally walked away. Forever.